Hello, and welcome to Strides of Pride, LGBTQ plus inclusion in running. My name is Suhaili Bautista Carolina, and I'm the Director of Public Programs and Partnerships at the American LGBTQ plus Museum. And we're delighted to be partnering with Athlete Ally and Frontrunners New York to present tonight's program, which also happens on the occasion of Transgender Awareness Week. While we are gathered in a virtual space this evening, we are each tuning in from our respective Indigenous lands. I myself am joining you from Brooklyn, New York, the unceded homeland of the Lenape people. As the headquarters of the LGBTQ plus museum will be located in what we now know as Manhattan in New York City, we share our land acknowledgement from that geographic perspective. We respect the diverse Indigenous peoples connected to the territories on which we reside and gather, and honor the energy and stewardship of these lands by all Indigenous generations, past, present, and future. I'm very excited for tonight's conversation with our brilliant panelist and moderator, and it is now my great privilege to present tonight's moderator, Jay Solle.
Thank you so much, Suhaili, and hello, everyone. My name is Jay. I use they, them pronouns, and also coming to you from New York City on the ancestral unceded territory of the Lenape people. I run with Frontrunners New York, which is the largest LGBTQ running club in the world and also a 501c3 nonprofit registered here in the state of New York. I'm also the race director for the FRNY LGBT Pride Run, which is an annual Pride charity run occurring in New York with over 9,000 people each year. I'm so excited to be here tonight and want to again thank the American LGBTQ Museum, Athlete Ally, and Frontrunners for sponsoring and putting on this fantastic program. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that this is a brave space for discussion. And while we will have a Q&A session at the end, want to encourage all of our panelists and attendees to keep that in mind as well. Super thrilled to be here with these fantastic panelists, especially as Suhaili mentioned, leading up to Transgender Day of Remembrance on Monday, November 20th. And we are super excited to bring you a dynamic discussion about the path towards LGBTQ inclusion in running and through the lens of history. So now I am super excited to turn it over to our fantastic panelists for their short introductions, and we'll invite Zackary Harris to begin.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zach. I use they, them pronouns. I am also a member of Frontrunners New York, and I am also the co-chair of our trans and non-binary committee at Frontrunners. I also have the honor of being the inaugural champion of the 2021 New York City Marathon's non-binary division. I've ran upward, this year was my 10th marathon, 5th in New York City, and still running to this day. Outside of running though, I am a third-year law student at Brooklyn Law School. And yeah, thank you for having me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Zach. We'll pass it over to AC next.
Hello, everyone. My name is AC Dumlao. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns, and I'm also calling in from Brooklyn, New York, or Lenapehoking. I'm a transgender, non-binary, first-generation Filipino American person, and I work at Athlete Ally as the chief of staff. Athlete Ally is a nonprofit organization dedicated to making sports more inclusive for all people, specifically LGBTQI plus folks. And we do that through education work, policy work, research studies, and activating athletes from the pro level, Olympic level, and Paralympic level, because we really believe in athletes using their voices for change. Close to say this past June, I really had the honor of representing Athlete Ally at the New York City Pride March as one of the Grand Marshals this year. And the shirt I wore said, "Let trans kids play," in all caps. And so I'm really happy to be here with you all on Trans Awareness Week.
Thank you so much, AC. And I'll pass it next to Anna for their introduction.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here today. My name is Anna Maria Aguero Jahannes. I use she and they pronouns. I am an artist and designer and most of all, a space maker. I'm based in New Orleans, Louisiana, which is Choctaw land. I am a former high jump state champion in high school. And that's really where my love of running escalated, I guess. And a few years ago, I took my different art forms, which is performance and design, interior design and space making, and created a commission that I presented at the Shed in New York that reimagined track and field as a realm for Black, queer, and trans people to experience athleticism and aesthetic liberation and collective joy, and just really tap into what track and field could feel like if Black, queer, and trans people made it their own. And so what we did was it looked and felt a lot like a track meet. So people performed in the hurdles and also the high jump. Some of the events were done straight up, track and field realness, and some of the events were done through performative dance. So hurdles was reinterpreted through Vogue. And so it was a way for people to really think about athleticism. What is it? Do we like it? Competition? Are we into that? Gender? How does the show up? How do I feel good? How do I feel free? What is running to me? And so I'm happy to talk to you more about that work today. Thanks for having me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Anna. And finally, but certainly not least, I will pass it to Gio for her introduction.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Giovanna Fischer. Gio, I use she, her pronouns, and I am reporting to you live from Los Angeles, the land originally and still inhabited and cared for by the Tongva, Tataviam, Serrano, Quiche, and Chumash peoples. And I am an educator and cultural strategist, currently serving in the role as Chief Equity Officer at the Los Angeles LGBT Center. I take a lot of pride in my background as an educator, which I think roots like my ethos of everything in play and imagination and wonder. And I'm also a marathoner. And so I feel like those all intermesh and intermingle with one another to kind of, I've been through my own reimagining of like what running can be. I've only been running in this capacity since 2021, so I still consider myself, especially in the marathon game, new to the sport, and so I'm very much still learning, but it is such a huge, huge part of my life. And so, yeah, it's a pleasure to kind of bring all the parts of myself into running. Which has shaped a really queer understanding of the sport and like what it could be. And I'm really happy to be here and be in conversation with everybody.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And so excited for this discussion with this really fantastic panel. I think we'll really be able to bring both personal and historical perspective, as well as a rich discussion about where inclusion for queer people is going in the sport. Since we are centering part of this discussion around queer inclusion in running through a lens in history, I wanted to start by contextualizing two very important folks to the history of diversity and inclusion in running. The first I'll start with is Catherine Switzer, who is known as the first registered woman to run the Boston Marathon in 1967, paving the way for full inclusion for the women's division in the 1972 Boston Marathon, and dedicating her work and her lifetime to a work of inclusion in running. And of course, would also like to bring into the conversation the pioneer in running, Ted Corbett, who was the first African-American to run the marathon in the Olympics in 1952, was a founding member of the New York Road Runners, President's Club here in New York as well, and was later inducted into the National Distance Running Hall of Fame for his pioneering work in inclusion in running. And while we talk about these folks, and we'll likely talk about others today that are documented in history, let us also remember that there are likely many pioneers and space makers in running and in queer history that have done immense undocumented work and have not been recorded, and so we remember them as well. So finally, I get to turn it over to our fantastic panelists, and I'll pose the first question for the group today to talk about where running meets the road with queer inclusion. I'd love to start on a personal level. Who or what inspires or informs you in the queer running community, and why, and perhaps how can we learn from that? I'll leave it open to anyone that would like to start the discussion.
Very nose goes over here. I can kick us off. I actually want to shout out one of my colleagues at Athlete Ally. Their name is Dan Diamond. They're a non-binary person, and they actually just came in first in the NYC Runs 10K on Governor's Island in the non-binary TGNC category. They are not a runner. They're a Muay Thai fighter. They're actually a 3-time national champion in USA Muay Thai, and they shared with me one. I don't know if you folks know Chris Mosier, but he's a big friend of Athlete Ally, and he was actually training Dan from afar. And two, that Dan shared with me that running is something that's helping them find their way in sports as a non-binary person. And they shared with me that they miss competition, and so being able to run in that category was really important and really inspiring to me.
I'm happy to go off of that as well. For me, I think just broadly, all of the non-binary runners that I've met, being a non-binary person myself and participating in racing in events across the country, well, more East Coast right now, but people like Cal Calamia and Jake Fedorowski and Jake Caswell and all these people who in my mind are now like stars of non-binary running, and like truly in awe of every day at all of the stuff that they are trying to achieve and just make this sport like more than it can possibly be.
I will jump in, and I think with AC, I'm really, I think, look outside of the running space, I think, for sources of inspiration. And during the Boston Marathon, when I ran in 2022, I never was like super driven to run Boston. I mean, I was still new to the sport, but I was just like, I don't get it. It's Boston, and like I know that there's lots of wonderful people in Boston and there's some beautiful history, but it's still Boston. Like I have that history of it as this like site of colonialism in the United States. So I was looking for like, how are we gonna connect to this land? Because if I'm gonna run this race for 26.2 miles, I need to connect to this land. And in addition to like understanding the indigenous communities there, what came to mind in like my practice is Audre Lorde's like uses of the erotic as this like space to really drive like why I run. She really understands. I mean, everyone who hasn't read that essay, you should do it because it's great and it'll liberate you from everything that you might need liberation from. Not everything, but it'll incite some feelings of liberation that could drive some other things forward. And it really like honors that the erotic is this like power in this force. I mean, she's speaking specifically for women in that moment, in that time, contextualized in her body. But it's this like source of energy that isn't just relegated to the sexual, but it's kind of it's a power, and it doesn't necessarily make tons of sense, but it's provocative. And I'm not a super competitive person, but there was some force that was like taking me over, that I'm honestly having a hard time connecting with in this moment, but it was present then. And that really, I found myself like referencing that a lot on the course and in the run. And I find myself going back there and back to that essay when I need to be reminded of like why I'm interested in this wild, slightly masochistic sport. Is because it activates something in me that like is applied not just to the running itself, but to like other elements of my life too. And so, Audrey always and forever inspiring many, many things, but she really shows up for me in the running space.
Yay, thanks for shouting out Audrey. For me, I'm really thinking about a couple of people who participated in Field Day in this performance event that I did. And I guess just as a foil is that I was like kind of a super athlete growing up. I love sports. I felt good in them. I felt like myself with them. I kind of was more introverted, and it was a place where I was like really just doing well. And so sports for me was like a really good space to be in, kind of out of my brain and just like in my body, like feeling good. And of course, as I've learned over the years, that was not everyone's experience, especially growing up, middle school, high school, right? And so with Field Day, I asked for kind of regular people to get together. A lot of people were in their late 20s, 30s, early 40s. So also people who like aren't even trying to be athletic anymore, who decided, okay, I want to try this thing. And there are two people in particular that really, their stories stick with me. One is a person who is a trans man, and he said that growing up, when he was identifying as a little girl, his dad always pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed for him to be athletic and in sports. And that pressure was too much, and he just could not connect with his body, athleticism in any way. Also is like learning more about himself and his transness. And so it's just, it was too much. And so Field Day was a space where he was so excited to be a part of the team, to run around, to like play sports. I just, running is this like childlike thing, right? I mean, we can talk about marathons and we can talk about like racing, but running is just this thing that our bodies do and can do, and especially in such a playful way. So just to see him run and enjoy the sport was so beautiful. And then another person who grew up in a community where being a woman, like athletics wasn't really allowed. And so this was also their first time experiencing what it felt like to be an athlete as well, but in a really different way, right? And so just, I was just always blown away by how much and how fully they were able to participate, being in a safer space, a space that was dedicated to them, a space where they were like calling the shots and doing it. They could be as competitive as they wanted to be, or one of them was like, so I don't want to be competitive, I just want to play. And that was great. So yeah, just really inspired by the way that they moved through that space.
That is amazing. Thank you to each of you sharing. And as I'm hearing this common theme, I'll also say, Zach, Jacob Caswell is someone who inspires me personally as my partner. I think they should probably inspire me. So that's a good thing. But of course, I think what is so interesting to me is that everybody makes a connection of their inspiration or being informed about running to either finding themselves or someone else finding themselves on their journey, what that meant for them along their journey. And especially I just heard you say the words learning about their own transness. And so I wonder if maybe one of the panelists would like to dig a little bit deeper into that on their own journey or someone's journey that they have observed, and talk about that connection to like why is running So like directly connected into our identities in so many ways like this, specifically our queer identity.
I can speak on that a little bit because I mean that's kind of how running is what kind of helped me come to my identity as like a non-binary person. For context, in high school, I was also in track and field and cross country for the first 2 years of high school. But I grew up in a very small, conservative, like middle of nowhere town, Midwest. And I was also the only openly LGBTQ person in my school. So I didn't really stick with running long because my teammates were just blatant homophobia, transphobia every single day, no matter what the situation was. They always found some way to bring it into conversation. And it wasn't until college that I refound running and started running around my university, which was in the Bay Area at UC Berkeley, which has great hiking trails. If anyone needs to go, it's lots of hills, great for training. And it was around this time that I refound running, but also started questioning my gender identity. And so I was lucky that I had so much time that I now was investing in just being with myself. Because running, while it can be a very group activity, it's often starts very solo. Like you have to figure out your pace. You have to figure out like what's your rhythm. You have to figure out how far can your body really take you, and like that is a very individualized thing. So I got a lot of time with myself in nature, got a lot of time with myself in my head, and just thinking like, what is my gender identity, like how do I see myself, like what's all this pain that like I've been feeling around me that I haven't been able to really put a name to up until this point. And so for me, it was being able to have those moments where I was alone and running with just around campus that I like actually was like, no, I think non-binary is the identity that feels right for me. It's the word that feels right to me. And like, since then, like running still continues to sometimes be a place where like I can recenter myself in my own identity.
Thank you for sharing, Zach. You know, how, I don't know if other folks here relate, but I think being a queer person and making sense of myself, I've had to like learn to like this discipline intermingles with this discipline, or this idea, you know, like binary thinking has been disrupted because I've like had to in order to make peace here. And it's been beautiful to like watch how that informs my running practice, you know, and how these concepts or ideas outside of running, I'm like naturally applying them to running. And so one of them, which my team and I talk about a lot. So I run for Black Roses NYC and Capri Collective, which is based in LA. And we talk about compersion a lot, which is in the like polyamorous, like non-monogamous space. But basically it's like getting pleasure from like your partner getting pleasure in some way. Doesn't have to be just sexual, but and how I feel that, you know, and I don't identify as like poly, but that term has like really lent itself to like, it's such a beautiful concept, AOL. It's like, wow, how like beautiful it is to be able to like get pleasure for something that's like not necessarily about you. Like it's not directly about you. It's about like watching other people thrive and feel fulfilled. And I really like get that in running, like watching my team do great and feel strong. Like this morning I stopped, I'm not training, but my team is training for Valencia. And so where they were training is on my way to work. And I couldn't go run this morning, but I did stop for 10 minutes to watch them like clock off these 800s. And it was such a beautiful way to get my morning going. And then I drank my coffee and went right back to work. I got to work early. It was great. And it's like totally that feeling of it's compersion. You know, it is like, y'all are thriving. You look strong. You've been like working for this. You've been hustling. And I do think that it is kind of my learning and just like queer theory and just being queer and like having to not think so binary about like this is sports and so we don't bring theory into sports and we don't bring these ideas here. It's like nope, they're all dancing, and in fact the sport is so much richer and so much more beautiful and like this like deep thing and creative thing because all these other things inform it. And I think that's like definitely because I mean I feel like it's a big blessing to be a queer person. For me personally, that's how I feel, because I do think that it's shaped how I think about things. It's like liberated me from some more rigid ways of thinking that I'm happy to be liberated from.
I think I have to out myself as not a runner on this panel. I don't want to give people the impression that I'm one of you. But that's all to say, and I really appreciate that, Gio's like the compersion, the watching, the cheering on, the feeling fulfilled, right? Sports and athletics isn't just about being the athlete, it's about the community around you, it's about your teammates, it's fan culture, it's people cheering people on. You know, I cry when I watch the New York City Marathon, right? It's such a moment in the city and across different other big marathons. And so, you know, I think that what I'm hearing and what I relate to as an enjoyer of sport and a supporter of amazing colleagues who are doing that deep work is how awful it is that it is being taken away from young trans kids, categorically from transgender women in many by many national governing bodies, right? Because ultimately, those choices aren't rooted in you know, kind of fact or you know, by experts. It's just taking things away. And sports is the conduit through which so much change can happen, and it's also where people can get really start seeing red when they start thinking about fairness. And for me, it's like, well, not all runners are made equal. If you were all made equal, you'd all run the same pace. So why are we trying to fit people into boxes of a cisgender binary? You know, there's so many different ways that make people competitive and fast or slow or good at long distance or you know, hurdles. Like, I just would love to like hear all of y'all's thoughts as runners about that.
Yeah, I want to add to that. I thank you for bringing in the other people, not just the runners, right? I think in my project, what was really moving for me is being a coach in that capacity. And also, I wasn't the only one, there were others. And really thinking about, okay, then like, why are people here? And people are here for so many different reasons, right? To move their bodies. Some are actually just here to meet some other people, to chat, to hang out, to have something to do, to get off the screen, right? Like all these real reasons to be here. And some are here to break their own records, and some are here to be competitive. And all of that is good and fine and can coexist. And as a coach, I think it was important for me, and what was really nice to see the other coaches do is to really tap into the individuals who are participating and to really think about, why is this person here? And using that as their measure of progress and their measures of success. And really congratulating people for the effort, or for, you know, actually doing better than they did last time, or for just showing up, or, you know, all of the reasons that people are showing up, just tapping into like that person's reason. And I think when we think about it in that way, this like the sports can really change. They can change like how we are congratulating people, awarding people, you know, recognizing people. It can change. And so then the categories that exist don't even matter. They don't even make sense necessarily. So we can play with that aspect as well. Yeah, so I just wanted to bring in sort of a different perspective as a former runner who doesn't really like running anymore, you know, what that was for me to be a coach in that context.
Thank you also so much for sharing. And this idea of compersion, I think, is such a fantastic way to put it. And I really empathize with this too. My own personal little story, finishing the Chicago Marathon a couple months ago, the first thing I did was pull out my phone and look to see, how did my partner do? How did my best friend do? And then I started crying, because the joy of seeing that everybody did what they set out to do, succeeded, hit their goals, right? It's not just that perhaps I did it, but this sport of doing it together as a team, doing it with people that you love and care about. I mean, I think that's something that we as queer people bring to this that's so special. But Asa, you made such a really good point about the policies, the attacks that are happening on people, and how this is taking away the opportunity for people to find their queer joy through sport. I think that there's something to talk about there, and why this is happening. And I know too, this is happening in the non-binary category. So maybe actually I'll start with you, Zach, if you can tell us a little bit about kind of what your experience is racing in the non-binary category, maybe what it was like to be the first winner of the New York City Marathon non-binary category.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like non-binary divisions in terms of running really started around the 2021-ish, is when we started seeing racing organizations really considering what would our races look like if we were actually being inclusive the way that we say that we're supposed to be. And I say that because there's plenty of running organizations that often tout that they are for diversity and inclusion, but yet still maintain, or even sports in general, so hardcore maintain that sports have to remain in this binary of cis men and cis women, and that any sort of person who's trying to compete in one division or another and doesn't fit their logic of cis men or cis women basically is out to break the sport and make it an unfair place. When in reality, it's really the cis people who are making it an unsafe and unfair place for trans and non-binary individuals. And I think in 2021, it largely fell under the radar a little bit because it wasn't so well advertised amongst all of the races and stuff. And now in 2022 and 2023, it's really becoming this thing that is starting to kind of take hold, that racing organizations are really realizing that they have to have non-binary divisions now. It's when you have organizations like the New York City Marathon, the Boston Marathon, the London Marathon, the majors, essentially, it sort of is having this trickle down effect, which I don't believe trickle down usually ever works, but somehow it's happening in this context, that even now small organizations are seeing that we need to, and small and large are starting to feel that we need to actually own up to what does diversity and inclusion look like, and that is including non-binary individuals in the sport. But at the beginning, it was largely fell on the radar, and those who took notice really came out swinging and wanted to try to find any way to discredit our abilities as runners and the validity of the divisions themselves, and still do to this day. After I swear, anytime a news article comes out about who won this week's race in the men's, women's, and non-binary division, there's always some internet troll who is making their mission to misgender people and create more violence in this world against trans and non-binary individuals. But I think we have also been lucky in that we have some fierce advocates in our goalposts who are not just or I'm trying to make a sports reference. I'm really bad at sports, actually. Running is the only thing I'm actually good at. And so, but we do have some people who are not just non-binary individuals, but also allies as well, who have been sticking their heels in the sand and like saying like, no, we're not going to move on this. Like, this is what inclusion is meant to look like in our sport, and we're not going to cave to whatever your rigid notions are of how sports have to run.
You know, I think like, what's at stake if not, I think is something I'm thinking about right now. And like, we're in the middle currently, like this moment. And, you know, I can speak specifically to California. There's a slew of just so much anti-trans legislation targeting trans youth. If you're familiar with Los Angeles, I mean, our main area that we're focusing on at the LA LGBT Center in terms of advocacy and canvassing is Glendale, which is like you know, you got some hip folks moving in. It's 20 minutes from where I'm speaking to you right now. Like, it's not 3 hours away. It's not like in the cut somewhere. It's Glendale. And part of like the major platform is targeting trans youth, inhibiting trans youth from participating in sports that align with their gender identity. You know, and I think about us, and I think about we all here have accessed the joy of sport in some capacity. You know, what that relationship is so different. And we think about young people, like, and as you're moving through the world, like figuring yourself out, to like cut off, to not have access to this space of like being in your body, of like moving in whatever way, you know, you're able to do, and to access like teams and like to access community in that way, that like, you know, has not always been like positive for everybody, but it also has been like a source of so much learning, of so much joy, of so much figuring it out. And that being completely like barred off from somebody if that's what they want to do. And that's like what's on the table right now. Like, there's, you know, there's people are showing up with the fervor to like ensure that like trans youth can't access that, you know. And so this is a really important time, you know, as we're seeing things evolve, you know. And like watching the New York City Marathon was beautiful this year. It was like, yay, we've arrived at this one place, you know. And the parallel truth is like, and everyone's trying to like make sure that that's not accessible. And so, yeah, I don't know. I say that, I think, for folks who are on the call, because like that's like an urgent thing to like still tend to and bring our attention to right now, you know, and specifically for allies. Like, I think that's something to definitely, you know, bring attention and energy to spaces where, you know, maybe queer folks like you're not implicated in the same way, but like we need that conversation to happen in so many other spaces, because a lot's at stake actually, if it doesn't.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's almost weird that like we have this space that's very much for adults. Like, you have to be 18 to participate in like official running events, that is like trying to find a way to be more inclusive, but yet for kids, we're totally trying to rip this experience away from them. And often for like, we remember what it's all like being kids. We have no idea what, like, it's hard to project forward as to what adult life is really actually like. And so it's just totally destroying this image that a lot of beautiful young trans and non-binary kids should have towards sports, and develop at a young age, that they could take on into their adult life, that's just being ultimately ruined by this, all the nasty legislation and policies that schools are trying to implement.
Yeah, and just to kind of root us in history, first of all, you all are making history. This moment is November 2023, but this is living on the internet. So hello, whatever year you're watching this in the future. But in 2023, to give some scary numbers, there have been at least 550 anti-LGBTQ bills introduced across state legislatures this year, including over 400 specifically targeting the transgender community. And it was a record number for ones barring trans youth participation in sports. And, I don't have to rename kind of all of the reasons that we love sports and why they're important. But, trans kids seek to grow into trans adults, non-binary kids seek to grow into non-binary adults, and young people should have the ability to play and be great at running or just be hanging out. And I'm just want to circle back to your story about kind of coming to your non-binary identity, Zackary. Like, imagine a young person being told they can't, hang out with their friends after school because they are a trans young person who has the experience to be in that part of understanding themselves, and therefore the world is stopping them. Just makes me sad.
Speaking of sad, the thing is, it doesn't really get better. I think that what you're pointing out is that for adults, there are starting to be more and more spaces for, non-binary people to participate in running. And yet also we still have people like Caster Semenya, who's a South African middle distance runner who's been, like back and forth with the like athletic governing bodies for years about whether or not she can run. Caster Semenya, I don't believe identifies as intersex, but fits into that sort of general category of intersex. And so what these governing bodies are saying is that your hormones are not right. They're not what they're supposed to be, and you need to do something to change that. And so they're asking this person to change the way that their body is naturally. And so these are people that's someone that I look up to. That's someone that I know that young queer people look up to as an amazing middle distance runner, Olympian. And when we see that, it's like, I don't know if I want to keep going down this path. It doesn't seem like it actually does get better, even if I can make it through childhood. That's what adulthood is. That doesn't seem something to chase after. So unfortunately, yeah, it's not great in the adult world either. There's still a lot of policing and a lot of spaces where we are participating and being scrutinized or asked not to participate or just canceled. And a lot of like misinformation, and a lot of, Caster Semenya was, I think, 18 when she first was, getting out there in the world. That's a baby, that's a young person, and now is like a full-grown adult and is still dealing with the same stuff. So it stays hard, but I think things are changing and there are spaces, which I'm really happy about.
Thanks, Anna. And to that point of change, maybe to highlight a win, I mean, we just saw Cal Calamia have a historic decision granting them a TUE as a non-binary trans person in the non-binary category to be able to let them run. And so, as we think about where we're moving, I think that's a great segue to say, what should we be doing to advocate for inclusion? If you're watching this in 2023 or sometime after, what are things that we need to be keeping in mind or actively doing to make running a better place for queer people?
I think run crews, like there's so many crews, and I love the running community, but I think I'm still in spaces where it's like, ladies and gents, like time to do the workout and let's split up, and it's not like, I mean, I know for this group of people right here, we're like, that's not, we're thinking hopefully that maybe it's beyond that, but like, that's really what needs to happen is like, I mean, most of my training partners are cis dudes. And I am so served by training with them, even if I'm not like toe and toe, just like we start together, we do activations together, like any notion that like we can't train together is wild. And so like folks of all genders can train together, and we can get creative with training together, and we don't all have to be at the same pace either. Training together also means like doing our pool days together. It means warming up together. It means activating together, and like when it's time, like everyone can still be served to like run their best race individually, but like we've got to like let go of that gender binary in training spaces and running crews.
Yeah, and also this idea that the winner that's the goal is to be the winner, like the number one person, right? And it's just not. That's great. That actually is a lovely feat. When I have been the first person, across the finish line, it has felt really great. But it's also great because I have tried really hard, because I've pushed myself, because I'm representing a team, because I want to know what I am capable of and what my body can do. And so it's like amazing to see that. And it's not just because there were people behind me, and I think Giovanna, what you're saying too about even it being a great experience to run with people that you're not quite as fast as, right, is still such a beautiful experience. And also that in my for me has helped me push harder and find and find things to be inspired by. So yeah, I think there is a space for competition, there's a space for sort of like placemaking, and also that's just not the only thing that we do when we are running, or that when we're participating in a sport, whether it's individual or collectively. There's so many other things. So really allowing those things to be celebrated and named, and really just be as present in the sport versus just being the winner.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, like, where has the fun gone? Like, sports and being athletic is meant to be an enjoyable experience. And I feel like in all of the discussions that people try to have around excluding trans people or non-binary folks from participating in sports, it's so heavily emphasized on like the competition, like the fairness, like all of these artificial things that we get so hyper associated with sports, but yet we lose the idea of like, isn't it meant to just be something enjoyable for people to participate in as well? Like, shouldn't everyone have the ability and the opportunity to experience that joy and to have both a personal and team achievement, or just like develop who they are and their athletic potential? Like, we lose so much of that when so much of the conversation gets so much invested on like, we just have to make sure that these people are still able to win because they're the ones that we think are supposed to be winning, when that's not really like the most important thing that comes out of being athletic and being involved in some sort of sport like running.
I am just so happy to be part of this conversation. When I think about like the future and forward, I also think of like to move in that direction, you have to work on the inward. And so what I would want for folks watching and for the future is for folks to, just keep taking in the stories of trans and non-binary runners. Trans and non-binary people are not a monolith. So I want to like shout out the documentary Changing the Game, which features two incredible Black trans women, but who are high schoolers competing in track in Connecticut and their experience of the racism and transphobia they experienced, of the court cases that are still going on till today, that they're trying to overturn trans girls being able to participate in sport. They also follow a few other youth athletes, follow Chris Mosier, follow Cece Telfer. You know, these folks are out there. Follow Jay and my panelist friends to hear our stories about being queer people and trans people, because it's only by getting those stories out there that we can, you know, continue to have people understand that we're human. I always feel like I'm kind of ringing an alarm bell when I say, you know, participation in sports is life-saving, but it literally is. I've heard it from cis people, trans people, people of all backgrounds. There's a humanity piece in it, and to deny someone that, especially as we're having this panel during Trans Awareness Week, which leads up to Trans Day of Remembrance, we can never forget that. Yeah.
I got goosebumps. Thank you so much for all of that. And I think a couple of things that I heard, or something that really resonated with me, is this idea of kind of the collective queer joy that we have, right? This is not something that we do individually, even if sometimes we're physically running on our own. The inclusion around the sport is something that's so inherent to all of this. I think it's really, really special. I do want to flag that we have a couple minutes for questions, but I haven't seen any come in yet. So if we do have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A function down on the bottom tab. In the meantime, I'll ask our panelists if they want to share any other moment of kind of personal queer joy around sport or around running that they have as part of that kind of collective joy that we have. Careful, I'll put you on the spot.
I just talked, so.
Gio, I saw you unmuted there for a second.
Yeah, I didn't have a specific thing to say. But the question was another final moment of queer joy, was that it? Or just joy from the running space? Yeah, I mean, I can't, you know, I think, actually, I have a moment. Suhaili, who is with the LGBTQ Museum, is she's running now, and like she wasn't in May, and she's
It's
like
a miracle.
running a half marathon and has been like committed to the practice, you know, and we talk about it all the time, but she, you know, it is kind of this like, it's a case for you know, like representation, like it's not everything, but it does matter. Like if you see somebody doing something and you have more access to like another story, you don't know how that might incite something in you. It might not, you know, it might make you go in this direction or that direction. You know, in this case, it totally, you know, connected to like, she was like, let me try this running thing. And she's like bossing the entire game. Like I'm impressed. I'm floored. I'm like, you were not running at all. It's November and she was not running before May. And now she's like, and she's on the path to New York City Marathon, you know? And so I think it's a case for just like our stories and like talking about it in conversation, but also that like people who thought that they weren't going to access the sport ever didn't know that like that light could be lit up. Like it might be, you know? And so even if you haven't run before, you don't know, you know, like I don't want to proselytize, like, cause it's not for everybody. It definitely is not. But like, you know, there's a way for like people to touch it and like tap in and be moved by it. And Sue is definitely a case for that. and now I have somebody like in my community who's been in my community for a minute, and like we can like drop into geeky runner stuff, and it's beautiful, and here we are in this conversation. And so just a case for like, it's there when you want it. Running's there if you want it, when you want it, in some way. You don't need to run. Go watch somebody else race, see how it moves you, see what happens next.
What a brilliant way to put a bow on this panel. And so thank you so much for that. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. I also want to thank the American LGBTQ Museum, Athlete Ally, and of course, Frontrunners for partnership on this panel, and many, many more things to come in our journey of advocacy. I do want to put just a very quick shameless plug that the 2024 FRNY LGBT Pride Run will be taking place in Central Park in New York City on June 29th, 2024. Registration will be opening early in 2024, and it sells out quick, even with 9,000 folks. So we want to invite, obviously, everybody who is on the panel and attending today, and if you're watching this before June, come run with us. We would love to have you. So I'll pass it back to Sohaili with that, and thank you all so much.
Thank y'all. This is so beautiful. I'm so moved and inspired by each of you. Everything you're doing is so important. And like AC said, you are making history. You are making queer history, each of you. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today. Thanks, Jay, for facilitating this wonderful conversation. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, AC. Thank you, Zackary. Thank you, Giovanna, my coach, basically, at this point. Thank you, Lucy, for being behind the scenes and providing support for this program. Please follow us. Our journey is just getting started. The American LGBTQ+ Museum is doing programming everywhere, online, across the country. We have a traveling exhibition called Queer Justice that's going to be touring the country next year. So please follow us on Instagram, subscribe to our newsletter. Please follow what these folks are doing with their work. Get in touch with Anna, follow Field Day, follow Athlete Ally, check out when Capri and Roses are running, cheer them on, follow Frontrunners, participate in the Pride Run or go cheer. Like we said, right, there's joy in this sport from many, many angles. So thank you all for joining us this evening. Have a wonderful and inspiring Transgender Awareness Week, and we hope to see you at a future program sometime soon. Have a good evening. Bye.